I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflection on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Our guest is Erwin Mitchell, former member of Congress, former member of the Georgia State Senate, Solicitor General of the Cherokee Judicial Circuit, and Superior Court Judge in the circuit. Welcome, Mr. Congressman. We're delighted to have you.
I'm delighted to be here with you, Bob. And I've enjoyed our preliminary memories that we've shared together.
Good. Well, you've had a full and enviable career in Georgia politics, but before we get to that, I would like to start by having you tell us a little bit about Erwin Mitchell growing up in Dalton and how you got interested in politics.
All right. I was born in Whitfield County, and my father was born in Whitfield County. My grandfather was born in Whitfield County, and my great-grandfather moved here, but that was about 1818. And he was a Confederate veteran and is buried in the Mitchell Cemetery, which adjoins the Conasauga River, which is the dividing line of Murray and Whitfield counties. So my roots are here, and I've managed to stay here and love it for 84 years. My father was Wright Mitchell, a lawyer, and my uncle was John Mitchell, a lawyer, and they both attended the University of Georgia, as almost all of the Mitchells that have come along since, including my family. But I say I was born in 1924, and I think most people try to reflect as to what you can event you can relate to a age that you were. And you say, well, Bob, if you ask me, how did you get into politics? The first thing that I can remember that relates to my age was being with my father at the old red brick courthouse in Whitfield County when they were tabulating the votes between Herbert Hoover and Al Smith. And my father was the campaign chairman for Al Smith in Whitfield County. And of course, Al Smith was a Catholic, and you know how that was back in those days. But I was 4 years old at the time. And my father and my Uncle John were active, and although my father only had one elective office, he was mayor at one period of time, and that was back during World War II, and then was asked by Governor Ellis Arnold to come to Atlanta as a part of the Attorney General's office, which he did. My Uncle John became Solicitor General, District Attorney, and also Superior Court Judge. So that's sort of the background in which I grew up. I was fortunate that I didn't have to go through the agony that the majority of young people have in determining what they want to do with their lives. I began to go to the courtroom with my dad and my uncle when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, just absorbed by the atmosphere of the courtroom. So it was all that I ever wanted to do was to become a lawyer. And that decision was made before I was in double digits. And so I went to the schools in Dalton, played a little football, played a little basketball. That's the only athletic teams we had back in those days. We had a little intramural track, but we didn't have baseball, we didn't have golf, we didn't have all of the other things, because my high school at that time was probably about 300, 350. And of course it was the 8th through the 11th grade. And I graduated from Dalton High School in May of 1941. Before that time, at the time that I was 9, 10 years old, my father had been carrying me to Bulldog football games. We always went back down to Columbus for the Georgia-Auburn game. If you'll remember old Memorial Stadium down there, I think it would seat about 15 or 20,000. But we'd make that trip every year. I remember one trip when I was just a kid, when Huey Long was governor of Louisiana. And LSU had this huge, I think maybe it had 350 member band that he brought up. And LSU just beat the devil out of us that day. But I remember walking out of the stadium, and my dad's friend that was with us, his name was Ed Strain, and he was right in front of me, and somebody back of us yelled, "To hell with Huey Long." And somebody in front of Ed turned around and knocked him flat on his. So that was another taste of strong political feelings that was demonstrated very vividly to me at that time. My father was a ardent supporter of Dick Russell. My Uncle John had been a classmate of his at the University of Georgia Law School. So, Senator Russell had very little opposition when he became governor, and when he went to the United States Senate. But we were always strong supporters and admirers of his. Gene Talmadge came along, and this was not my dad's, or my uncle's, or my mother's cup of tea. And so we never supported Eugene Talmadge, nor did we support Herman when he came aboard. So there were political clashes in Northwest Georgia, which my family was one of the leaders on one side and others on the other. Sometimes we won, sometimes we lost. Most times we won until people started saying, "Well, you're always supporting the loser." So we think that maybe we better join the other side because we're not getting a lot of the fruits that come from winning in state politics back in those days. But I digress and move way on to Washington, where I served when Herman Talmadge was the United States Senator, and became friends and very fond of Herman personally. And I thought much of him personally. We still didn't have a lot of political agreements, but very fond of him. But that's sort of the background, my history of how I got into politics, is because it was just almost preordained by what my father's influence and my uncle's influence. I headed to, back in, I graduated from high school in May of 1941. Of course, the British were already at war, and one of the things that our family always did was righteously, we, as with my father and my mother, we had listened to the evening news. Always, every one of FDR fireside chats I heard, and I would hear about all of the aircraft being shot down, the British aircraft in the raids over Europe back in World War II. And of course, our ships were being torpedoed by the German submarines, and it was clear in my dad's mind, and therefore in my mind, that we were going to go to war. So I really knew nothing much about the Citadel till time came to go off to college. I'd always said, I'm going to be a bulldog. I'll be over in Athens as soon as I can be there. But I decided to go to the Citadel and was a freshman there at the time of Pearl Harbor. I was on our intramural basketball team, and our company commander came to the armory Sunday afternoon and told us that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was, but it was obvious that everything changed. We had the old M3 rifles. They came and got our rifles so they could hand them out to the draftees that were going to be coming to train for the Army. But as soon as I finished my freshman year, and the love of my life, who we began, I guess, steady dating. You really can't date when you're 7th grade, but she was my girlfriend from the 7th grade on and all the way through high school. And we sort of planned to go to college together, except there weren't any girls at the Citadel, so she went over to Shorter. But then after my freshman year, I transferred to the University of Georgia, so she could transfer, and we could be at the University of Georgia together, and we were. And those were glorious gridiron days. Frankie Sickwich, George Poshner, Charlie Trippi. Charlie Trippi is still living, and I'm sure he won't remember this, but I had an ROTC class with him. And I'd been to the Citadel, and I probably knew as much about the military as our instructor did. Charlie always sat next to me, and we had a lot of conversations, and of course I could very incorrectly claim that I got in through ROTC, but I do remember him very fondly. After Pearl Harbor and war was declared, I applied both to the Naval Air Corps and the Army Air Corps. And that's before we had an Air Force, it was the Army Air Corps. And heard first from the Army, and I was accepted, and so I went ahead and signed with them. Later heard from the Navy. I don't know what I would have done if it had been reversed. I'm sure I would have gone with the Navy. But anyway, I was too young to serve, so they just put me in the, I don't know what they called it then, but I was just on a waiting list to get old enough I could go in cadet training. And I did the following February. And but in the meantime, I'd gotten enough undergraduate credits at the Citadel and University of Georgia that this is before you had to have a graduate degree in a law school. So that when I finally got out of World War II, I could go straight into the University of Georgia Law School. But I went on into the Army Air Corps. I was first called to, I think, Montgomery, Alabama, and then they sent me down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and then to San Antonio, and then to Fort Worth, and then to Winfield, Kansas, and then to Victoria, Texas, and Matagorda Island, Texas, where I was classified as a fighter pilot, and that's where I transitioned and learned how to fly a very difficult airplane to fly, and that was an old P-40. Then I spent a little time in Moody Air Force Base at Valdosta, and mainly just waiting for delivery of the latest fighter that we had, and that was the P-51D at Sarasota Army Air Base. And when the P-51s arrived, they sent 18 of us down there to transition in those aircraft for, as they said, operational training. We had no idea what they had in mind for us at that time. But I remember that in addition to the 18 of us that went down there were 2 Iranian pilots. They were captains in the Iranian Air Force. What a difference. Now, I doubt if we would have any Iranian pilots in the Air Force today. But when we completed that, then they put us on a Pullman. And for 5 days, we were on that Pullman going from Sarasota to Seattle, Washington. And of course, when they said our destination was Seattle, we knew we were going to the Pacific. Then with our aircraft loaded on a escort carrier, we headed out to Honolulu with our aircraft aboard. And when we got there, then our aircraft went on to Guam, which we had already taken, acquired Guam, and they flew us to Guam to join our aircraft. Then from there, the Battle of Iwo Jima was about to take place. I was not involved in this was a Navy and Marine operation, the Battle of Iwo Jima, but we were there waiting for Iwo to be secured so that we could move in as fighter groups to escort B-29s in their raids over Japan, and that's what happened. Now, you know, I just keep going on, Bob, and as I think your question was how you got into politics, and I'm talking about World War II.
Well, that's history. That's what we want. Well, let's talk for a minute now about your after service. You went to law school at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, but one thing I've got to tell you that because we've got some old bulldogs and other researchers that have an interest in flying, I'm sure, in World War II history. But I've got to tell you about this Georgia boy's first escort mission, escorting B-29s over Japan, and it was over Tokyo itself. That was my very first mission. And what we would do is bombers would be in a bomber stream, and we would just fly alongside of them to protect them for any aircraft that might be coming. Well, of course, I looked down below, and there was the city of Tokyo. At that time, in order for us to do these long-range missions, the ingenuity of the aircraft mechanics had devised a 163-gallon external wing tank to go on each of the wings of the P-51. Now, the P-51 was designed for only a 75-gallon tank, and that could be operated internally, switching tanks. The 165-gallon tanks, we were told we had to manually switch. We had to keep time as to when you were going to run out of fuel and make a switch to the other tank. And if you didn't do that, if it ran out, you might fall away vapor lock and your engine would shut off and never start again. And there I was flying over the city of Tokyo. And all of a sudden, all of my other pilots were up here and I was going down there, and everything was quiet. And I realized that my engine had stopped. But I switched over and it caught back up. But I just couldn't resist telling that story. But that was my first experience. Anyway, I finished the Air Force and immediately came back after I was separated. And as a matter of fact, I was separated in February of 1946, I guess it was, and I the next month went right into to law school.
Let's stop for a minute. I want to get your mouth a little there.
Talking too much.
No, you're doing good. You're doing good. Yeah, this is what we love. Okay. So now we got that. Now we're trying to get you back into Dalton from the University of Georgia. You did come back to Dalton after you finished the university.
I came back to Dalton
and practiced law.
Yeah, after finishing law school, I came back and joined my father and uncle in the practice of law. The firm Mitchell and Mitchell was founded the year of my birth, 1924. And later, my older brother, who served in the Navy during World War II, he had gone to law school before Pearl Harbor. But when the war was over, he came back. He had married. He got a job with Judge Jewel Felton at the Court of Appeals, and went to Emory, and I got his law degree there, and he also joined us. So that was the foundation I had in starting the practice of law. I'd been practicing for about less than 3 years when I separated from service. I say separated instead of discharged because I signed on in the inactive reserve. And, all you did was just get something in the mail every now and then. You didn't have any meetings or I didn't have any responsibilities, but a lot of times I wouldn't even open the mail. But this time, this would look sort of official, and I opened it, and they said, "Lieutenant, we want you to come to Montgomery, Alabama. You're going on active duty during the Korean War." And so I was recalled, and because I'd gone to law school, instead of putting me in the exotic jets that I'd never flown, they said, "Well, we need a legal officer up in Presque Isle, Maine. We're just going to make you a legal officer and send you to Presque Isle, where they have 2 seasons, winter and the 4th of July." And so that's what happened. They sent me up there, and I said, "My Lord, this is a Georgia boy in this kind of weather." I was married then and had children, and I noticed the first thing was that the houses along the roads were all up next to the roads. And I said, why would people do that? Because of all the traffic noise? Of course, I realized it was because of the snow. But anyway, before my family joined me, they transferred me to Wilmington, Delaware, in Newcastle Air Force Base, where I stayed until I was separated from service in the Korean War. I spent about 16 or 17 months in the Korean War, and during that time, a very fine man who became a dear friend of mine was the current Solicitor General. But people were unhappy with his service, and some people were prevailing upon me to give it a shot at running. And I was in the military now, keep in mind. And my dad said, "Well, we'll help, but you've got to come home on weekends now and do your campaigning." And I did that. And while I was in JAG at Newcastle Air Force Base. I ran and was elected Solicitor General of the Cherokee Circuit, which consisted of Murray County, Whitfield, Gordon County, and Bartow. That's Cartersville, Calhoun, Chatsworth, and Dalton. And I was released, I guess probably in November, so that about a month before my time expired. And that's because my Uncle John contacted Senator Russell and said, Erwin needs a little preparation time. Get him home. And so Senator Russell got me home about a month earlier. And that's my beginning in politics.
So then, as I recall, Henderson Lanham passed away. He was a congressman, and you decided to run for Congress.
Well, before that, I spent 4 years in the district attorney's office or solicitor's office, and the presiding judge that I worked with announced that he was not going to run for re-election. Well, I was only 31 years old, and folks would say, well, look, this is a time for you to run. And you've been there on the circuit for 4 years. I said, yeah, you know, think I can get elected? Oh, we'll help you, we'll help you. And so I did run and was elected Superior Court judge at the age of 31. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed that service very, very much. But after I'd only been on the bench for a little over a year, Henderson Landrum, who was the congressman from the 7th Congressional District, was killed in an automobile train collision. And the seat in Congress came open. And here again, and Bob, you know, every person has got a right to say no. But all of my adventures in politics were brought on by someone else encouraging me, literally. It was not a bad ambition I had, because I had no thought. I'd gotten to know Judge Landrum real well, had great admiration for him. We were supporters of him, and I was just saddened about his death and the loss to all of us. But the folks kept coming, including some folks over where he lived in Rome, saying, well, we want you to run. And I did. And we really had a short but rather heated contest. A very distinguished criminal attorney named Bobby Lee Cook was one of the candidates, and Judge Manning from Cobb County was the other. So we had a 3-man race. At that time, the Cherokee, the 7th District was comprised of 14 counties. Murray, Gordon, Whitfield, Catoosa, Dade, Walker, Floyd, Gordon, Bartow, Douglas, Harrelson, Polk, all the way down to the actually below Atlanta in Douglas County in Harrelson. So I ran, and I was very fortunate in that election, and won 12 out of those 14 counties. This is a time of the county unit system, as you remember, and of course that's another story.
Yeah.
But anyway, I went to Washington, and without just as happy as I could be sitting on the bench. I love the law, still love the law. It's been my life. But somehow or another, I always seem to get entangled with political adventures. And so I began my my first term, which was during the Eisenhower administration, and served with people like Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader, Jack Kennedy, and of course both of them were vying to become the Democratic nominee, you know. Of course, Richard Nixon was the vice president. That probably the greatest speaker of ever was Sam Rayburn from Texas, was the Speaker of the House at that time. And Carl Vinson from Milledgeville was the Admiral. He was known as the Admiral of our country's Navy because he was chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and Dick Russell, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And at that time, Senator Talmadge had been elected, so those are notables that I served with, and including Phil Landrum, who was and he may have been your congressman.
He was.
Yeah, and he was a dear friend of mine.
Georgia back then had a congressional delegation that had built up a lot of seniority.
Oh yes, and that we miss so much today, because all of the military facilities that we have relate back to the Talmadge Vincent times, and but they were, you know, respected not only within the Congress, but they were respected everywhere for their knowledge and their service.
If I remember correctly, you were on the space program. You're one of your committees.
Yeah,
and that was before we went to the moon.
That was when, if you'll remember, it was announced that you know, we're going to go to the moon, and the 7 original astronauts came before this is the House Committee on Science and Astronautics. As a matter of fact, right over your left shoulder is a photograph of that committee and us receiving our congressional flag. But yeah, Senator Glenn and all the other astronauts came before us. They were just, of course, I was a kid. You know, I was 32 years old at the time, but. John Glenn, I guess, was older than I was, but he and the other 6 came, and it was just unbelievable. But it was a fascinating experience because Overton Brooks from Louisiana was chairman of the committee, and even though I'd only been there a short time, I was the 4th ranking majority member on the committee, and I know a trip I'll never forget was he asked me to go down to Alabama to Redstone Arsenal, and that was the time, if you'll remember, we had hypothecated the one who had designed and implemented the what were they called back in World War II, the unmanned bombers that were coming from, Werner von Braun was there heading the Redstone Arsenal and preparing us for the boosters for the Space Committee. And he was really a fascinating man, and if he was anything other than a scientist, I don't think he ever was a Nazi. He was just a scientist, and this was just part of his inner being. But yes, I was on the original Space Committee, and I still have that interest. But those were quite remarkable days back in the beginning.
So you were elected to fill out the term of the former congressman, and then you were reelected for another term.
I was reelected. I'd had no Democratic opposition, but I did have Republican opposition, I just, you'll have to explain why, but I always seem to have opposition. But I was reelected, and but now this is an oral history of not just me, but what I observed and what was going on in Washington and in Georgia and in the world. My antennas had been really, although interested in politics, had been directed to the law. When I got up there, of course, it was all politics, and I began quickly to find out that my philosophy was probably not the prevailing philosophy in the state of Georgia. And there were things that were coming up call for our vote that I was having a struggle voting for. But for a year, I did that, and I didn't like it one bit, but I did it. After I was reelected, I said, you know, one member of our delegation told me the first day I arrived, he said, now, Erwin, he said, you just be quiet, stay away from them damn newspapers, and you can be here as long as you want. And just vote as the delegation votes. But my second year, that became harder and harder, and I had some votes that were not earth-shaking, but yet they stirred a little, a ripple or two back in Georgia. For example, when the statehood for Hawaii came up for vote, I couldn't find any reason not to vote for Hawaii to become a state. But I was the only member of the Georgia delegation that did that. When the National Defense Education Act, which was sort of akin to it was federal aid to education, and of course I had benefited immeasurably by the GI Bill, putting me through law school with my dad's help. And I could find no good reason to vote against it, but I voted for it, but I was the only member of the Georgia delegation that did. And then my dear friend Phil Landrum, sponsored with a Republican congressman from Ohio named Griffin, Landrum Griffin bill, which was a labor bill, and it was one that never had any committee hearings on it or anything, and this is probably the vote that bothered me the worst, not because I voted against the bill, but because it had the name of my friend that I really admired and respected, Phil Landrum, on it. But I voted against that, and that caused all kinds of activity by the folks in Georgia who felt like that was a pro-union bill. I did feel like it was a pro-worker. I mean, it was an anti-worker bill, and it was not in the best interest of workers, but I thought it had nothing to do with unions. But anyway, but those are some of the things that began to cause people to be concerned about me, and me be concerned about whether I was, in tune with the people that sent me up there. But after the time passed with the Landrum Griffin bill, people began to, those that had not really agreed with me about my vote on that bill were telling me, well, you know, tomorrow's another day, you're getting some seniority, you stay. But this is, I didn't stay and didn't run for re-election. Whether I could have been re-elected or not, I really don't know. I think I could because the friendships I had built up throughout the district were good, strong friendships. But that's not why I didn't run. I didn't run for two reasons. I had 3 children. Back at that time, the Congress didn't stay in session from January till December, but usually broke about Labor Day. And what I would do is put my children in school in Virginia, and in Georgia, and then in January moved to Virginia and put them in school there. I had a son and 2 daughters. The son was the oldest. He really, this was really bothering him badly. The girls were all right, my wife was all right, but it was really not a good situation. And besides that, when I ran for the Congress, we decided that I would break completely with my law firm, that I thought any conflict of interest questions wouldn't be possible, so I received absolutely no income from Mitchell & Mitchell. And there I was with a wife and 3 children trying to maintain a home in Virginia and one in Georgia with 2 mortgages, and this is mortgage time now, and had a salary of $22,500 a year. And because of good friends and at First National Bank in Dalton, I was able to borrow money, and I in effect subsidized myself for the time I was in Washington, till we decided it was just a fruitful thing to come on back and start practicing law. And that's what I did. I had no intention of running for the Senate, state Senate, initially. But the last year that I was up in Washington, the immigration situation was getting worse and worse as far as Georgia was concerned. Of course, the Supreme Court had already ruled. We're making very little headway in Georgia, as you'll remember. And so I was being very vocal on my feeling that this was the law, and we didn't want the University of Georgia or the university system of Georgia or the public schools of Georgia being radically affected by the anti-integration forces that were prevalent in Georgia at that time. And so I was invited and made speeches all over the state, advocating that we keep the public schools open, that we go ahead and comply with the law where the university was concerned. And my dad said, well, son, you know, the best platform to keep that going is just go to the state Senate if they'll elect you, and they did. And I was elected to represent this Senate district in Atlanta for the 2 years back during the county unit system.
Those were very historical times.
Those were historical times, and you know, I look back at that and think about the folks that I joined in the state senate. And if you'll remember, and this certainly is your cup of tea, Bob, of course, Governor Vandiver, who I admired, had respect for, made that famous "No, not one" speech. And there was one bill in the state senate that I can't remember what it was, but it involved the schools, and it involved integration. And there were only 4 no votes against it, and that was Zell Miller, myself, Heb McWhorter from Athens, Clark County, and Charlie Brown from Fulton County. And back then, Charlie Brown, you know, it was all county unity. He was the only senator. But those days were, it was really serious. And you may remember the days of the Sibley Commission.
Mm-hmm.
The Sibley Commission had a tremendous amount to do with changing public opinion. And of course, the business community said, we can't think about, you know, having tuition grants to our public schools. We can't think about the lack of accreditation maybe from our colleges and universities. And so almost overnight, Governor Vandiver changed his mind, and all those wonderful people that I was serving with changed their minds too. Mm-hmm. And it really was an example that the people that were elected to serve, the majority of the people that were elected to serve in the General Assembly of Georgia at that time, their heart was in the right place. They felt like that the constituents didn't really appreciate that. And as a consequence, it sort of put up a barrier to moving forward on the integration segregation course. But as soon as they made that vote, I don't know of anyone that lost his seat by following the governor's lead and the lead of Charlie Parnell, who was the majority leader, and Carl Sanders and others. Of course, Carl Sanders became governor, and was an outstanding governor, as you know. Mm-hmm. And but those were historic times, and that stayed around for a while, and at that time, because of I guess certain notoriety that I'd achieved because of being the sole vote on a number of national legislative priorities. The news media and some influential individuals were advocating that I run for governor. Well, now I'll tell you that I knew there's no way that this fellow from Whitfield County, with a track record of mine, would, at that time in life, was going to be elected governor. But it was a setting where the views, which I did not think were radical, and could be exposed to all of Georgia. And I was invited to Albany, to Valdosta, to Gainesville, to Rome, Atlanta, Athens, where I would voice these views. And I say they were simple things like, you know, keep our public schools open. Let's have a two-party system. Let's do away with the county unit system. It's absurd. It's ridiculous, and things of that nature, which a lot of people didn't like. But it turns out that all those things happened, mm-hmm. and they happened for a reason, because that was the right thing. And so I hope that my voicing those things and the media picking up on those caused some people to begin to think And if it could just, you know, maybe it caused us to make those changes a little bit quicker than we normally would, but it was just going to happen.
Do you remember the three governors fight?
Yes.
Tell us your memories of that.
Well, of course, we were supporters of M.E. Thompson at that time, and and as I remember, Herman just took over the office, and he had to find him someplace else, and of course, I think the courts finally ruled, and that was accepted. But that was one of the the trying times. Another trying time was back during the Gene Talmadge administration, where the university system actually lost its accreditation because of the governor interfering with the Board of Regents. And I think that really was what brought Gene Talmadge down to earth. But here again, it was a county unit system back in those days, and South Georgia was ruling the roost.
Well, in that year, 1946, Jimmy Carmichael actually outpolled Gene Talmadge, but the county unit system kept Talmadge.
Jimmy Carmichael from Cobb County.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. He was the heavy choice of the modern thinkers in Georgia at the time, and quite an individual.
Yeah. And back at that time, we were really laboring, and I say laboring under the illusion that we only had one party. But we really had two parties back then. And when I was in Washington, all of us were elected as Democrats, but we certainly didn't think alike, all of us. I felt my thinking was more akin to Phil Landrum and Prince Preston, that was down in Savannah, if you remember, and J.L. Pilcher at Meigs, Georgia. And that's just about as South Georgia as you can get down at Meigs.
Yeah.
And he was a wonderful, wonderful man, and a very progressive individual, and a tremendous asset to Georgia. Yeah, those were interesting times. And with the two-party system that I was such a strong advocate of, I didn't intend for the Republicans to just take over.
Well, you know, it's said, and I believe that we actually had two parties all along.
Oh, yeah.
You had the River-Arnall faction, and you had the Talmadge faction. And today, and I hope you'll agree, the Talmadge faction of that day would have been Republicans.
Yes, no question about it. No question about it. And but I think the delineation between the parties is slowly becoming more defined. But we've got we've got religious issues involved that I don't think we had back in those days. There was no issues concerning, you know, gay marriage or abortion, but now that seems to play a tremendous role in Georgia, and the evangelicals have churches are so influential in Georgia politics. The race this year is going to be very interesting in that regard in Georgia as well as nationally.
What do you think caused the I won't say demise, but the loss of power by the Democratic Party in Georgia?
Well, you know, I don't profess to be an expert on that, but when the schools came integrated, that did not changed the depth of feeling in a lot of Georgia. Civil rights movement, and of course, Martin Luther King is one of my heroes. I mean, really, what a wonderful person. But when I was coming along and had this great admiration for Martin Luther King, he was being demonized by a lot of prominent political figures in Georgia. He was a communist and a man of bad morals. He just was a lot of bad things. So that feeling has taken some generations to pass. And so the civil rights activity in Washington with Lyndon Johnson, whom I had tremendous respect, and I think was a wonderful president. And I think he still could have been elected even.
Sorry.
Even because of Vietnam, I still think he could have been elected if he'd chosen to run.
Now I want to get around to one of your great civic endeavors, unless there's something you remember about politics you'd like to share with us.
Before we do that, let's change tape, okay, because I'm almost through the end.
Okay.
I'll tell you one thing that I didn't tell you that I haven't really told a few people in my life. But this is the Richard Russell Library,
Oh, wait, we want to get this?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh, okay.
The first year I was up there, and I was just getting settled, and I say the Senator Russell and his family and the Mitchell family had already a long history, and I was elected, what they termed a landslide when I was up there. I've been the youngest Superior Court judge in the state, the youngest prosecuting attorney in the state, and Senator Russell had the Georgia delegation in a little place up in the Capitol where where we had a quail supper, and which was very enjoyable. And I was just, of course, knew everybody, but I was just really still getting to know them and feeling my way around. And he said to me, just the two of us, he said, "Erwin, I expect you to succeed me when I retire." Now, you talk about a scared young man. I mean, that just absolutely blew the boots off of me. Dick Russell wasn't wrong very often, but he was wrong then. It just wasn't my destiny to succeed him. I would have had to change a lot of what was within me to have continued to be reelected for the period of time it was taken to succeed Senator Russell.
Let's talk about one of your favorite projects of all time, and that is the Georgia Project.
Okay. Now this is now we're really getting up to date right now. Back in the, I guess almost over 15 years ago in the early 90s, this area began to have an increase in Latino population. My youngest daughter was a paraprofessional at a Roan Street school in the city of Dalton. And about 1993, she started, literally, I mean, tears would come in her eyes about what was happening. Said, we're getting all of these little Latino children who cannot speak a word of English, and we have no teachers who can speak Spanish. And everybody just wringing their hands, and the school board's not doing anything. They're just acting like it doesn't exist. And the truth of the matter, the school board was, but because this was such a strange thing to happen in Northwest Georgia, they had no idea how to go about it, nor did anyone else. And but they were sending people out to say, "What do you do in a situation like this?" Well, they weren't getting any answers. They weren't getting any Spanish-speaking teachers either. And I would tell Leslie, my daughter, I said, "Well, I mean, this is horrible. Something really needs to be done." I'll talk to some of the school board people, but I say, "I'm not an educator." "Well, Daddy, you can do something." And I know one of the media people, I asked my daughter Leslie, "So why did you think your daddy could do something about it?" She said, "Well, he always did." And anyway, the next year it really got more pronounced, and she enlisted the aid of the teachers. Then the teachers started coming to me and saying, "You know, don't get me in trouble, don't reveal what I'm telling you, but we've got a horrible situation. These kids keep coming into our school. They're wonderful little kids. They behave. They are not a problem, except we can't talk with them, and they can't speak with us. And it's just getting worse and worse. We're trying as hard as we can, but we're making no progress." And so with that, I just said, "Well, let me think about it, Leslie." And the editor of the newspaper here was a friend who was a sort of a political ally, and I got him. And about that time, the Chamber of Commerce asked me to chair a committee that would be a group of us older guys, mentors, that we would just gather together, a group of mentors that would talk with young people about what we had learned through life and all of that. And that was to be my project, and I turned it down. And then I was asked again if I would do it. I said, "Well, wait a minute. I'll accept that role if I can choose the project." And so I told them my project is to try to do something about this influx of non-English speaking children in our public schools. And they said, "Okay." So I got together a committee of just 4 people, and but that gave us an aura of legitimacy, rather than me just getting a group of people and saying, "Look, we want to go into the school system and find out what you all are doing wrong." That doesn't really make you welcome, you know. But since it sort of had the auspices of the Chamber of Commerce, and I contacted them, and they folks at Rowan Street, and they're delighted to have you, and we'll schedule where you can go and with whom you can talk. And I told my folks, I said, "We're not going to pay any attention to where they're going to tell us to go or to whom we have the ability to talk. We're going to talk with anyone we want to." And by that time, the teachers had told me some folks for us to talk with. And we went in, and I will never forget it. I've lived here all of my life. I had noticed more brown-skinned folks in the community and automobiles and things, but I had no earthly idea what was happening in Dalton, Georgia, and northwest Georgia, where you would see at that time 1 out of every 3 children was brown-skinned. More brown-skinned than black-skinned. And so this was really shocking. And I began to write everyone. Wrote the governor, wrote the chairman of the Board of Regents. I wrote, and all these people would reply to me. I wrote the superintendent of schools. I wrote, about that time, Zell Miller had appointed Johnny Isaacson to the chair of the State Board of Education. I wrote and talked with Johnny Isaacson. And all these folks got interested. Not that they really did anything to help, but they thought this was finally, and this is when Superintendent what's her name, Simcoe was the, and she just passed it on down to, but it got down to a person that really understood what I was talking about, and she contacted me. And she sent me material to read and people to contact throughout this country, which I did. And we began to formulate an idea as to how we could do something to help the teachers and students in the public schools of Dalton. And there, the enrollment in like Brown Street was growing from 1 out of 3 to it finally got up to 9 out of 10. 90% Latino enrollment, and it's just unbelievable. But in the meantime, we were making some progress as that went along, and I was getting a lot of cooperation out of the leaders in the community, the industry, because certainly the industry was the reason these folks were coming, to fill the jobs that were really critical at that time, because the carpet industry was just running out of people, and they needed these people. And they were good workers, and with the rare exception, were all, model contributing members of the community. So finally, Bob Shaw, who was chairman of Shaw Industries and founded Shaw Industries, a lifelong friend of mine, and I was talking. He was aware of what I was interested in, and he asked me one day, he said, what are you doing? I said, well, Bob, we finally reached a determination as to what we had to do, and that is we've got to get some teachers from Mexico or somewhere in Latin America to come up here and work in our schools. Because these kids, you could bring an Anglo Spanish speaker, but they're not of the same culture. And that cultural aspect is absolutely a dynamite thing. And he said, well, I've got a partner down in Monterrey, Mexico, he's connected with some school down there. Would you like for me to contact him? I said, go get it. and to his everlasting credit, I don't think that Bob's partner was all that enthusiastic about it, but I think Bob was very tenacious and stayed after it. And finally, out of the clear blue, I got a letter written by Dr. Victor Zuniga from the University of Monterrey. It told me that he had been designated as the Mexican director of the Georgia project. Not our name, it was their name. And that he wanted to begin communicating with me. And that started a communication, and that was back about 1995, and or 94. Anyway, I think we kept saying, you've got to come up here and see what this situation is. He'd say, you come down here. I said, no, it's not down there. It's up here. This is where this has to be addressed. You come down there. You come down to us. And so finally, they prevailed, and I took the superintendent of schools, the chairman of the Board of Education, a teacher too, and some of the people that were working with me, and we went down and met with people at the University of Monterey. The first day that we got there, they put us in a little room to meet. It was half the size of this office. And we had a good meeting. And so we got a call the next morning at the hotel to say, okay, we're changing locations. We came to, it was about 3 times as large and about 3 times as many people. By the third day, we went almost a ballroom of folks at the university was listening to what we had to say. And one of the folks that I've continued to work with, who's now a professor at the UCLA, and written a number of books about the Georgia project. asked him, I said, Hernandez, tell me, why is it that you all insisted that we come down here rather than you all coming to Dalton? He said, we wanted to find out if you were real. And said, we have. And so just a couple of 3 weeks later, they came to Dalton, and the project was well underway. And the funniest thing is the folks down at the University of Monterey, I think they felt that the carpet industry was going to fund us and pay the bill. Of course, the carpet industry hadn't promised us any money at all. No one had promised us any money. But we had done this elaborate planning, and we had a plan in force that we were going to put into operation the fall of 1996, and we didn't have one dime to fund it. And this was the spring of 96. Well, this is, and you know, this is an oral history, and there's no need of an old man not telling you the truth. Out of the blue, the city of Dalton, composed of 5 folks, and I kid them, they were all bright and intelligent, but I would say here, you got 5 fellows who can't speak good English. Say, look here, we're going to give the Georgia project $750,000 over a 3-year period to get you off the ground. And that was just like manna from heaven. And believe me, we had kept them informed as to everything. We kept the whole community and the newspaper. This is why I have such respect for being open and with the news media to let people know what's going on. That they came to our aid, and we got that $750,000. Plus, we got another $500,000 from the federal government. Plus, we began to get through Mac Cleland and Paul Coverdale federal funding, and we continued to get it to a lesser degree through Johnny Isaacson and Saxby Chambliss till it got to be such a hot issue that it just ran its course in the muddy. But what we had done during the over 10 years we were in operation, we had brought 60 some odd teachers. These are graduate teachers, experienced teachers in Mexico to work in Georgia schools. Now, it's not just working with the immigrant non-English speaking kids, but what these teachers did was to teach Spanish to Georgia teachers, but they taught them the little gimmicks that only one of the same culture has, to where they could take an Anglo teacher and say, now, in this culture, this is the way kids will react. And so they have been a tremendous help as much help to our teachers as to both the English speaking and non-English speaking. And we have, through a connection that we made with the Center for Applied Linguistics in Washington, we provided staff development for several hundred English-speaking teachers, teaching them the tricks of the trade to teach immigrant children. And that's a book in itself to tell you how we made a contact with them and how that developed. We took that money and we provided scholarships to Georgia graduates for high school who were bilingual, and gave them 2 years of full scholarships to Dalton State College. And later on, we went to South Georgia and did the same thing at ABAC. And we had teachers down in Colquitt County, and of course had them in in Chatsworth and Dalton and Calhoun, and but it was a very expensive project, and we did get considerable volunteer funding by local businesses and individuals, but it was too big to be funded by the community chest, or whatever you call it now, because it was a $1 million operation. The local schools that we work with would put up, $500,000 a year, and we would get $500,000 a year to help provide this program. But the beauty of it, and why it's really sort of been the love of my life, is that although we are theoretically and in reality non-functional, we still continue to operate because we've got in our local school districts teachers that we brought from Mexico that are still there and will be there. They have become citizens, or they have married, they have become there. And what we taught the American teachers has been taught by those American teachers to other American teachers, to other American teachers, to other American teachers. We've got those kids that got scholarships from us that have gone through school and are now becoming graduate teachers. And they've gone into the school system teaching. They've gone into Georgia Tech and become engineers. They become architects. They become bankers. They become contributing members of society. Of all of my life, as you know, if you've ever had a sort of a prominent role in your community, people are going to call on you to do public service things. Well, public service to me is anyone who goes into public service is automatically my hero, because it is a wonderful undertaking. But anyway, I've did a lot of things in the community, but I've never, in my 84 years, ever had one thing that I saw produce results as quickly as the Georgia Project. When we brought that first teacher into the school of Dalton, it changed the whole attitude of the school. When I told you about the meeting, me taking 4 folks to go to Roan Street, it was a sour atmosphere. There were no smiles. The children weren't smiling. The teachers weren't smiling. It was just like, this is sad. This is pathetic. It made you feel bad. As soon as we got the first teacher and those brown-skinned kids saw that person of their culture, that told them that my white-skinned teacher and my white-skinned principal, she respects us. They're going to get somebody here to help us. And it wasn't a couple of months later that you go there and see the whole atmosphere in the school change. Both the Anglo teachers, Monterey teachers, the administrators, and in particular the kids.
Is the project still alive?
The project is alive only in that respect, but we have no funding. But I'm sure it's alive in part in many parts of the country because we had so many inquiries as to how to do it, and we were happy to share what we did. We won many national awards, and not that necessarily means it was that great, but it was, because I'm telling you it was. I saw it, and it just helped so many people, and continues to.
What is the health of the carpet industry today?
Carpet industry is having tough times, very tough times, and as about all industries are. And it's probably a mature industry now. And I think we've seen our growth. I think the carpet industry is going to stay right here, the center of it. Of course, it's diversified so into all kinds of, it's not really the carpet industry anymore, it's the floor covering industry. You've got laminates, you've got wood, you've got acrylic, you've got everything besides carpet. And all of the majors have gotten into those things. But I say it is a mature industry. It hasn't tended to go overseas like so many industries. Can't ever say that won't happen, but it's so situated with all these service industries that supply the carpet industry at hand that it might be difficult. And I think as shipping costs rise, it makes it more difficult for the Chinas and we can still compete because of certain costs.
As you look back over a very illustrious career, what is your proudest accomplishment?
Oh, my proudest accomplishment, and I'm sure everybody says this, but I can't say it with any more sincerity than me, is my wife and children, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Wife and I had 3 children, and I'm proud of the fact that they all had some identity with the University of Georgia. My son graduated from the University of Georgia. Well, I did have a daughter who lives in Atlanta now that she went to Queens College in Charlotte, but she's a Bulldog through and through. And my grandchildren all went to the University of Georgia. Now my great-grandchildren are coming along, and my first one is graduating from Lovett this year, and she's applied, and I'm sure that the rest of them are too young to be thinking about college, but she'll be the first of my great-grandchildren to go to the university.
How about your biggest disappointment?
Looks like I could come up with something like that. I feel like George Bush when they asked him what his greatest failure was, and he couldn't think of one. Gosh, Bob, that's it's a wonderful question, and I wish I had an answer that I could give you honestly. It would take some. I've had, many disappointments. Last Saturday in Baton Rouge was not one. I love that, and I don't want to be disappointed in Jacksonville this Saturday. I've been very fortunate with the health of my family, the success of my family, well, I guess one of the great disappointments in my life was losing my boyhood friend who stayed my very best friend until the time of his death, when he was only in his early 40s. This is a man whose son owns this building now. He's a lawyer, his son is, but this is Ray Bates. We started school together, and you can look at every school picture from the first grade on, and I didn't realize it till a couple of years ago when people were bringing out these pictures. We were always side by side, but we did everything together, and he is as close to me, I guess, as a brother could be. And I hated losing him so early in life.
If you had your life to do over, would you do anything differently?
Oh, heavens, yes. I mean, I would have to think of the many things I would do differently. Do I think my philosophical view would be different? No. I think so many of us are a product of our environment and our upbringing. And I'm a product of my mom and my dad. I mean, they involved me and all our children in everything that was going on. And when you've got kids sitting around listening to the evening news with their parents, when they're listening to fireside chats of FDR with their parents, when they're listening to Amos and Andy on the radio with their parents, I feel like that I was taught that honor was something that was important and truth was something important. My mother, and she was, and all of the whole family, my dad too, we're all Methodists. We've been Methodists since John Wesley came, practically, I guess. But she told me, don't ever call anyone a liar. That's just not the right thing to say. And I've remembered that all my life. And I know somebody was talking about old McCain on the stump and some things he was having to say about Obama, and I just said, what my mama told me never to call anybody a liar, but I said that fella is testing my upbringing.
Well, Erwin Mitchell, on behalf of the Russell Library and the University of Georgia, and Bob Short, I'd like to thank you for being our guest.
Well, Bob, thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope there's something in there that can be of some use to scholars as they dig into it in the years to come, because I love the University of Georgia, and it's just getting better and better and better.
For some reason, I observed that.
All right.